This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Rahima Esop. Here's something to blow your mind. A newborn baby's brain has about 100 billion nerve cells. During pregnancy, that's roughly 250,000 new cells every minute. And the connections between those cells? Well, scientists estimate that there are 1,000 times more connections than neurons. Just pause and think about all that potential. But brains are not just born, they are built over time, and they need more than food and oxygen to grow strong. They need interaction. They need caregivers who respond when a baby coos, smiles, or reaches out. These early connections provide either a strong or weak foundation for the connections that form later on. These connections are happening in the first 1,000 days of life, from conception to a child's second birthday. Now, to talk about the importance of the first 1,000 days, I'm joined by Liesl Engelbrecht, nutrition lead for the Hold My Hand Accelerator. Her colleague, Michaela Steenkamp, who's the language and learning lead at the accelerator, and Dr. Chantal Witten, Health System Strengthening Director at Ilifa Labantwana. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Hi, all.
Chantal, let's start the conversation with you. Given the importance of the first 1,000 days and what experts are saying about the first 1,000 days, how can mothers and families make the most of this critical development period?
When a baby is being developed in the womb, it takes a lot from the mom's body. She needs to eat well, she needs to sleep well, she needs to be in a good mental disposition, meaning how she feels about herself, how she feels about her baby, how she feels about the pregnancy, and how she's relating to the people around her. The most important support that families can give to pregnant moms is to be that support. She's a little bit emotional, so she needs somebody to talk to. She's a little bit hungry, so she needs some food. And then she needs to feel loved and secured, because when the mom feels loved and secured, her baby feels loved and secured. And as you said, those synapses, those neurons, they get really imprinted as the baby's growing. As that brain develops, the brain essentially is part of the body. The body can't grow if there isn't good nutrition. The body can't have those synapses if there's no stimulation. So the more the mom feels happy, the more the mom feels excited. She's singing to a baby, she's praising a baby, she's actually welcoming this life into the new world. That helps babies' brains grow.
Thanks, Chantal. That's a really beautiful way of putting it. So when we think about the important inputs for early childhood development, we need to start, as you say, with what happens before birth in the womb. Brain development in the womb is influenced by what a mother eats, as you've described, whether she's getting enough nutrients, her stress levels, how she's feeling, and her access to antenatal care. Liesl, from a nutrition perspective, what do pregnant women need to enable their unborn babies to develop their brain power?
Thanks, Rahima. At its core, pregnant women, as you said, need three core things, and that's nutrition, care, and support. So from a nutrition perspective, brain development starts in the womb, and it really depends on whether a mother has consistent access to nutritious food, so good quality food. So we know that energy needs increase by about 10 to 15% during pregnancy, while micronutrient needs increase by as much as 54% during pregnancy. So there are a few key nutrients that really matter for brain development. So that's protein for developing brain tissue, iron to support oxygen delivery to the developing brain, iodine for cognitive development and thyroid function, folate for early brain and neural development, and omega-3 fatty acid, especially DHA, which supports the brain structure and function. But it's not only these individual nutrients, but the overall diet quality and the energy intake. So pregnant women need enough nutritious foods regularly to support not only their own bodies, but also the growing baby's body.
So for our listeners, when we talk about micronutrients, we are essentially talking about essential vitamins and minerals. Liesl, we live in a country where over 40 million people live below the upper bound poverty line, scraping by on less than 100 Rand a day, while 10.8 million people live on less than 30 Rand a day and are considered food poor. These people have to make impossible trade-offs when it comes to spending money on food, transport, school clothes for their children, electricity and other basic necessities. Given this context of poverty, what do we know about the nutritional status of pregnant women in South Africa?
We see in urban areas studies that show diets very high in fats and salt and very low intake of fruits and vegetables. But at the same time, the micronutrient deficiencies are widespread. The data is scarce, but from what we know, about 1 in 3 women are anemic. So that's either due to iron deficiency or due to infections. We also see deficiencies in vitamin A. So some studies say up to 22% of women are vitamin A deficient. And also we see deficiency in iodine and other key micronutrients. But at the same time, approximately 40% of women are overweight or obese, which reflects this double burden of malnutrition. So we see both women that are undernourished, so about 7% of women are undernourished, but we also see about 40% of women that are overweight or obese. But with this, we see that this hidden hunger, this micronutrient deficiencies that women have. So importantly, this is not about individual choice. It's about affordability. Like you said, Rima, women are making impossible trade-offs between food, transport, clinics, etc. So we also really need to have income support during pregnancy to support women not to make these unthinkable trade-offs.
Liesel, so what is the consequence then of such widespread malnutrition and hidden hunger as you've described it?
So unfortunately, the consequences can last a lifetime. We see that undernutrition and malnutrition can result in women having low birth weight babies. So we know about 1 in 7 babies are born low birth weight. So that means a weight below 2.5 kgs. And this puts the baby at a higher risk of stunting later in life. We also see a high prevalence of preterm birth. And we know we also have more complications during birth, so more adverse birth outcomes for women that are undernourished. So the biggest concern is also what happens after birth. As I said, low birth weight has a very high risk of stunting later on in life. So babies born low birth weight up to 3 times higher at risk of becoming stunted later in life. And this means delayed cognitive development. And this also means poorer school readiness. And there's also very strong evidence that maternal anemia also affects cognitive development. So this really means that if we don't look at moms and babies in the first 1,000 days of life, this can have an impact on whether they're ready for school, whether they're able to get a job later in life, whether they're able to contribute to the economy. So it's really about trying to stop the cycle of intergenerational poverty before birth.
Chantal and Liesel, it's clear that what happens in the womb is important in that it sets a child up for a strong start. After birth, a baby's experiences continue to shape their brain, a process scientists call neuroplasticity. Things like breastfeeding, bonding, care and stimulation all form part of the experience that help the brain to grow after birth. Chantal, what is the impact of breastfeeding in the first 6 months on brain development and biological growth? What does the evidence tell us?
So we know that for growth, that in terms of length, in terms of weight, for a child that's under 6 months, that breast milk alone can sustain that growth optimally and healthily. So that's the guidelines from the World Health Organization. It is also the national guidelines of South Africa. We also know that the brain needs a particular set of fatty acids. Liesel referred to them and gave the specifics on it. It's because this is only produced by the mother's milk. And this is why it becomes the optimal feeding choice for the baby. More importantly, breastfeeding also brings the baby closer to the mom. So we have a lot of skin-to-skin touch. We have a lot of interaction at the breast. So during breastfeeding, moms don't always sit quietly looking at their babies. Often these moms are on their phones and they're talking, and the baby hears the talking. The mom might be singing. The mom might be listening to the radio. And so stimulation also happens at the breast. So we want to change the notion that breast milk is just about food. It's not about food. We want to talk about it as a superfood, as brain food. We want to talk about the act of breastfeeding also as stimulation. Stimulation for both the mom, We know that when the mom is breastfeeding, she releases oxytocin. That oxytocin rises in the breast milk, it gets transferred to the baby, and the baby has these happy hormones. Oxytocin is also known as the love hormone. So when we talk about bonding, people think it's a really fluffy thing that the child is bonding with the mom. But actually think about it as internet connection. That mom knows the cues of her baby. She can sense when a baby is unsettled. She senses when the baby is fussy. And likewise, if the mom is stressed, we know that mental health has come into the forefront of research now, because actually when you are disturbed, when you are unsettled, you also send stress hormones. Cortisol rises in the mother's blood, and she herself becomes unsettled and her child becomes unsettled. So what we're really talking about here is called responsive caregiving. Understanding how my baby responds, the cues, the eye contact, the silence, or maybe just the uneasiness. And so we are locating our childcare specifically around breastfeeding and that nurturing care that it offers. But like you said, those first 2 years is really about how well we feed our children. So as children transition from breast milk only for those first 6 months, we now start introducing other foods. It's called complementary feeding. So it's complementing the breastfeeding. Unfortunately, stats shows us that our breastfeeding duration has actually decreased. It was around 18 months. That was in 2008. And now it's below 11 months. And that was the last data from 2023. And so encouraging moms to still continue to breastfeed while they are introducing high quality foods that Liesel spoke about. We need the high protein foods because protein builds muscles. We need good quality micronutrients. So when we talk about complementary feeding, we're really talking about the quality of the food that we give our young infants and young children. It has to be many different kinds of foods. We find that in very poor households, they're eating monotonous foods. It's the same food over and over, day in, day out. And so you have limited variation and limited variation of the micronutrients. And when the quality and the quantity is low, this then stunts growth.
Liesel, back to you now. We heard President Cyril Ramaphosa in his State of the Nation address commit to eradicating stunting by 2030. And he said that government must focus on the first 1,000 days to achieve this zero stunting goal. What can the government do to address stunting? What are the sort of like big swings that the government can take to eradicate stunting by 2030?
I would say there are 5 key things that the government needs to do. So it's first to improve the maternal nutrition before and during pregnancy. So this includes things like ensuring access to quality antenatal care, scaling up effective supplementation, ideally multiple micronutrient supplementation, and importantly also providing income support to pregnant women. Mothers who are more food insecure are less likely to breastfeed just because of the mental stress that's also associated with food security and a bunch of other socioeconomic factors. But providing mom with access and financial access to more nutritious foods can also help support her to breastfeed. Secondly, I believe there should be a strengthened support for infant feeding, and this means protecting and promoting breastfeeding. So supporting mothers in the early months and ensuring access to appropriate complementary food, as Chantal mentioned. These things are really important. Thirdly, also to support this ideal and this goal of making food more accessible is that food should be made more affordable and accessible through a government-led initiative of looking at a basket of highly nutritious foods. Fourthly, I would say through community health workers, through supporting community structures where women can be supported, we can really support moms in providing that responsive care, in continuing to breastfeed. So an investment in community support would be ideal. And then finally, we need to see coordinated responses across departments. So really we need to see Department of Health, Social Development, Agriculture, Basic Education, Treasury, all of these need to have a common goal of reducing stunting. We need clear accountability and clear delivery mechanisms for these solutions. So with these building blocks, stunting and getting to 0 children being born stunted by 2030 isn't just a dream, but it can become a reality.
Michaela, let's shift from nutrition to early stimulation. What is the caregiver's role in stimulating early learning, considering that the child is very, very young?
I think the most important thing to understand, Rahima, is that early stimulation is really about relationships, especially in those first 1,000 days. The caregiver, and this might be a parent, a grandparent, or any other consistent adult in the baby's life, that caregiver plays the most important role because babies, young children, learn through interaction. They aren't just sitting back and absorbing the world. What they are doing is learning through these back and forth exchanges with the people who care for them. That's why we often talk about something called serve and return. This idea uses a game of tennis or ping pong as a metaphor. So one player serves, the other one returns the serve, and that's the start of a rally. So the baby might serve through a sound, a look, or a gesture perhaps, and the caregiver returns by noticing this and responding in some way. Ideally, this is the start of a sustained back and forth between caregiver and baby. I won't go into the science just yet, but what matters here is that these small everyday interactions are actually the building blocks of learning. What makes caregivers so unique is that they provide individualized experiences. A caregiver comes to know their child's personality and their interests, their pace, and a caregiver comes to know them even more deeply through responsive caregiving. Caregivers can then respond in ways that build on the child's own curiosity and initiative. In this way, learning grows out of what a child is already interested in. A moment of play or a shared look or a conversation during feeding, these are all really rich learning opportunities. And I just want to add, it's not just about stimulation in a cognitive sense. Warmth and emotional connection build social emotional skills and create a sense of safety as well. And that safety is what allows children to explore, to take risks, and ultimately to learn. So broader systems like healthcare and reliable social services create the conditions for caregiving. But the actual work of early learning happens in these ordinary relational moments, especially at home.
This term, serve and return, it sounds very academic, like a scientist came up with it. What does the science tell us about serve and return?
So the science of serve and return does come from neuroscience and developmental psychology, and it helps us understand how these relationships actually build a child's brain. In the early years, a baby's brain is forming connections at an incredible rate, as you said, much faster than at any other point in life. But those connections aren't just genetically pre-programmed. They are actually shaped by experience. So, when a child serves, like I said, by babbling, maybe pointing or making eye contact, and an adult responds in a warm and age-appropriate way, that interaction activates neural circuits in the brain. When this happens repeatedly, those circuits get strengthened. So it's a bit like building and reinforcing pathways. As a simple example with language skills, when a baby looks at an object, like a chair for example, and the mom sees this, points at the chair, says its name, talks about it, the baby makes the connection between the sound chair and its corresponding object. So over time, these back and forth interactions support the development of key systems. Language, for example, attention, memory, and emotional regulation. So, something as simple as responding to a baby's babble is helping to wire the brain for communication. The opposite is also important to note. When those serves are not returned, when there's little responsiveness or interaction, those neural connections are weaker, or they might not form in the same way. Another really key piece of the science is stress. Responsive caregiving helps regulate a child's emotions. So when a caregiver soothes and responds consistently, the child learns that the world is safe and their body doesn't stay in a heightened stress state. This is crucial because chronic stress
can interfere with brain development further down the line.
Thanks, Michaela. And to Chantal's point, this can happen during the practice of breastfeeding. Chantal, let's consider the realities of family structures in South Africa. Many children grow up with grandparents while one or both parents work elsewhere, sending remittances or payments home to support the child. We also know that father absence is common in South Africa. More than half of children under the age of 5 do not live with their biological fathers. There may be other men in the home, but not necessarily their biological fathers, either because of death or absence. In these situations, mothers or grandmothers or older siblings carry the caregiving load. What does responsive caregiving look like in this type of low-income, high-stress scenario?
Rahima, in South Africa, just like the rest of Africa, the extended family has always played a role in caring for children. Children and pregnant mothers and breastfeeding mothers were always getting special attention when the family structure is wholesome and intact. What we do see with mobility, meaning people moving around, and a lot of relocation and a lot of informal settlement when people are moving from the rural area to our urban centers to actually come and look for work, this is when moms are really unsupported. They're coming into a space and into a place where they don't have that extended families. So what we see in the Child Gauge, which is a publication we use to draw from practitioners' insights, not just research, is that where the mom has an extended family network or social network, where there is stronger social cohesion, mothers supporting mothers. So we have a lot of those kind of programs. We've seen it also in the HIV context when there's a buddy system. Those children seem to have a better safety net and can thrive. There is a huge need for fathers to be engaged, a need where we also need to focus on fathers and understand how do fathers see their role in caring for their children. The little bit of information and research that Elifa has undertaken on our side-by-side campaign is that fathers see themselves as the providers. They don't necessarily see themselves as the person that needs to engage with the child because they do see that as women's work. So we do need to bring out these gender roles and these gendered nuances because everybody has a role to play. We talk about whole of society. If you see a child walking down the road alone, as a woman, you naturally tend to think, why is this child unaccompanied? You stop, you ask. But we are seeing that more and more the erosion of family structures and the erosion of some of these caring practices. And as Michaela said, we want children to feel secured. We want children to be secured in the social environment that they find themselves. And many children actually do feel very scared. They feel scared about other adults because they don't have those built relationships. And that's mostly because so much of the care work is done by the mothers. And motherhood, we've seen publications talking about the mother load, does need us as society to embrace mothers and support that caregiving in a way that is not demanding, in a way that's not instructive, but has this natural tendency to nurture and want children to flourish.
So what I'm hearing is that in these types of scenarios, women need safety nets, they need a community. And I know that NGOs are stepping in. NGOs like Grow Great, for instance, with its Flourish program, focuses on the first 1,000 days. And another organization called Go, 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 Go focuses on supporting grandmothers and making them champions for maternal and child health.
Well, I think the idea we've all come back to in this episode is that responsive caregiving doesn't happen in a vacuum. Instead, it really depends on how the caregivers themselves are doing. So if a caregiver is stressed, overwhelmed, dealing with trauma, making the impossible choices that Liesl was talking about, or struggling to regulate their own emotions, it becomes much harder to offer the kinds of attentive back and forth interaction that young children need. So supporting early learning really means supporting the well-being of the caregiver as well. And this is where civil society organizations can play such a crucial role. Firstly, they can create spaces of support and community as well. Caregiving can be very isolating. especially in contexts of poverty or where services are unreliable. Organizations can bring caregivers together then. This can be through play groups or support circles or home visiting programs as well. This way, caregivers can feel more seen, supported, and less alone. That sense of belonging can make a real difference to how people show up in their caregiving. Secondly, organizations can support caregivers' emotional well-being and self-regulation. Many organizations are doing really important work helping caregivers process their stress and trauma and build their own capacity to stay calm and responsive. Thirdly, there's a role in advocating for the services and policies that support responsive caregiving and connecting caregivers to services as well. Sometimes what's needed goes beyond what a community program can offer. It might be targeted mental health support or healthcare. So civil society organizations can act as a bridge and help caregivers navigate systems and access the support services that they are entitled to and that they might need. Then, of course, there's the more visible side of the work, which is equipping caregivers with knowledge, tools, and confidence. This might include sharing simple ideas for play, providing books or toys, or helping parents make them themselves. And it could be modeling serve and return interactions. But it's important to say that this shouldn't be about telling caregivers what they need to do. It's got to be about, as well, helping them recognize their own agency and expand on what they're probably already doing in everyday moments with their babies and toddlers. So all of this points to a bigger idea, essentially, that if we want children to thrive, we really have to support the people who are doing the work of everyday care.
Absolutely, and linked to what you've just said, Michaela, it's about having communal or shared spaces made available for these positive and productive activities between caregiver and very young child, like libraries, like community halls. Chantal, as we close this conversation, for NGOs working to support caregivers and that focus on the first 1,000 days, how can they advocate for greater investment in the first 1,000 days and contribute to a whole of society response to improved child nutrition and development? Like, what is this mind shift message that they can internalize and vocalize when they advocate for this?
We haven't really used this word responsive caregiving and responsive interventions. We've been doing things like supporting breastfeeding, supporting mothers with mental health, but we are talking about connecting, engaging and empowering moms, extended families and communities to care about children. So for our NGOs, please be in the rooms when these conversations are happening. Please sow the seeds of becoming a better community, whether you're a community agent, whether you're a practitioner. How do we care for each other? How do we care for the children in our care? How do we build caring communities? And I think we have not talked enough about how do we support and care in families. NGOs do not need to really, set up these play groups. You can be playing in your families. Make time to play with families. Make time for family time. And that is one way we can do it without thinking about extra money, extra resources that are coming externally, but what can we do internally as a family, as a community? And therefore, the NGOs, we are now trying to really do more integrated planning, integrated execution. We can do this better when we multiply our efforts. So if it's about nutrition, bring in the early learning, speaking, sharing with children, cutting up the carrots together, talking about the vegetable garden. These are also opportunities where we can build nutrition integration with early learning, nutrition integration with mental health. There are many opportunities that caregivers and care organizations can partner to deliver on a care package. One may be doing mental health, one may be doing nutrition, but if we all are working in concert, we actually get a multiplier effect. And we need to be advocating to each other as we try to build this responsive care narrative and paradigm shift.
Thanks, Chantal, and everyone today. As we've heard, the first 1,000 days presents a powerful opportunity to shape a child's life. Good nutrition, access to healthcare, income support for families, and responsive caregiving all work together to shape how a child grows, learns, and experiences the world around them. What's clear is that supporting young children and supporting their caregivers isn't just the responsibility of caregivers alone. It depends on the systems that are built around them to create the safety net, as we spoke about. When families are supported, children have a far better chance of reaching their full potential. So a big thank you to all of my guests for helping us unpack what the science tells us about babies' brains and what it means in practice for families and communities across South Africa. And now, over to you, those listening to this podcast. Using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps or download the takeaway sheet from our website, dgmt.co.za, and go to the podcast page. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself, and then share your reflections with your colleagues, your friends, or your family. Question number 1, how can you or your organization create spaces to support the mental well-being of caregivers? Question number 2, how can your organization incorporate the first 1,000 days into your work? And question number 3, what can your organization do to strengthen the fabric of support for caregivers and communities? This is DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.